Welcome to this January edition of our Eucharistic Revival small group study. As we journey through our discussion and reflection on the Holy Eucharist, perhaps one of the things that strikes us the most as Catholics is the Mass. I don't think you can think about being Catholic without thinking about the Mass. And of course, the Mass is where we encounter the sacrament of the Eucharist up front, up close, and personal. As we reflect upon the Mass in this month's session, I want to invite you to think about how you encounter Jesus in the Mass. Why is the Mass so important to us as Catholics? What happens spiritually to you as we attend and see the Eucharist appear on the altar before us, and to know that Christ is giving himself, body, blood, soul, and divinity, that heaven and earth are united? There's so many things that we could think about, and the great holiness that surrounds us in this sacrament. Thank you once again for joining together in these small groups, reflecting upon our belief in Jesus Christ and the Holy Eucharist, and this month spending time looking at the Mass and seeing how the Eucharist given to us in this great gift leads us to a deeper relationship with Christ for eternity.
Well, in thinking about that, there's one that stands out above and beyond anything else that I've ever experienced. It was this time of year, several years ago, during Advent, and a friend and I decided to go to Boys Town for Mass and then grab some lunch afterwards. We walked into church, and what I remember is just the most beautiful environment that I think I had ever walked into. Everything was gold and Christmas, and it was just such a warm and wonderful feeling that time of year. And I just remember thinking, I'm so glad I'm here. Well, little did I know the experience that I was about to receive. Sat down, prayed, and all of a sudden, Mass is ready to start, and an elderly priest, with the aid of an assistant, came out to the altar. They brought a stool for him to sit on, just because of his advanced age. He began Mass as usual, with prayers and just things that you would expect, until we got to the consecration of the Eucharist. It was something I had never experienced before. The reverence, the respect, the love that this priest had for Jesus at the altar was something that I probably think about just about every time I'm at Mass during the Eucharist. It made such an impression on me. The tears just ran down his face. And I'm sure we're running down everyone's face that was at Mass that day. It was, and the whole environment again just seemed to get brighter and golder, and just Jesus was there. If I had ever had a doubt, which I didn't, in my Catholic faith, I always believed Jesus was present in the Eucharist. But after this experience, this holy experience, that day during Advent, things changed. It's changed for me forever. Not that I believed more, it just changed. And it's just, again, something that is forever with me.
I would say recently, the most holiest experience I've had would be my son's first communion, and experiencing that with him and being there with him and seeing his excitement of the Eucharist and receiving it. I could definitely feel Jesus's presence, and just felt like this overwhelming feeling of happiness for him and the excitement that he shared. I could feel that. It was just a blessing to help him through the preparation and get him ready to experience what I've been able to experience for my life.
That would be December of 2021, specifically in my mind, and it will be etched forever. It is the day that I felt the warmth of God, and it is the day that I accepted Jesus into my heart. I opened my heart and began my faith journey after 40 plus years of ignoring my calling. Right here at Mass, it was during the responsorial psalm, and I cried. I remember the lady standing next to me. She would kind of look over, and it was a very emotional moment for me.
It's hard to think about what the holiest experience I've ever had at Mass, because there's probably been more than one. But I think what jumps out to me right away is it often happens on Holy Thursday. There's just something about that Holy Thursday liturgy that when you're commemorating the birth of not only the priesthood, but the Eucharist, and that's the night when it happens, that there's just something special about that Holy Thursday Mass. And so I am very conscious, probably more than just on an ordinary Sunday, when consecrating and celebrating the Eucharist at that Mass and saying the words, "This is my body, which will be given up for you, and this is my blood, which will be given up for you." I try to do it very deliberately and very carefully, and that just draws me more into it, that the reality of that moment is like, this is the night when this happened, and that for the power of that to hit you, for that to hit me, that is something. And it often brings tears to my eyes. Sometimes it's even hard to speak the words of consecration on Holy Thursday, because it's just so rich, it's just so powerful. I think that's probably the holiest experience, just the intimacy of that moment, and being able to do that with the people gathered there for that Mass.
So during the pandemic, I was not a practicing Catholic. I was baptized as an infant Catholic. My mom is a non-practicing Catholic, and I was, I went to some, CCD kind of things up until I was like 10, 11, maybe 12, and then we stopped going to church. And so I largely grew up without faith in my life. But I think the pandemic in some ways might have brought me to Christ because of the isolation that we all experienced during that time. There's a certain loneliness that I think all of us had. That was a time, I think, where people really needed God in their life. I know I did. When I had my first communion, kind of like I described when I was here at Mass and I had that calling moment, like there was a similar kind of like sensation, or it was different. Like I knew God was present in that. And so ever since that has happened, in all honesty, I don't take communion all the time because there's such a reverence for it to me. I don't want to receive the body and blood of Christ without fully being present. I don't want that act to ever become just that, an act where I'm checking the box. Then I make sure, okay, I go to confession, I clean up, and all those things, because I don't ever want to take. So I can imagine if I wasn't able to get that, my soul's kind of empty. It's a very emotional thing, right? Some of these things are hard to describe.
I didn't realize how much I craved the Eucharist and receiving the Eucharist every week. I didn't realize how much I would miss that, and I also didn't realize how much I missed seeing everybody at church, and the community that we have at St. Charles has really affected our lives in a wonderful way. And so I didn't realize how much I missed that when we had to stay home for Mass. Everybody being here and receiving the Eucharist is something I took for granted and didn't realize that I needed.
Well, initially it affected me with some frustration. I didn't like the idea of not being able to be with my parish family, the community. That's always just been a big part of my faith life and has just enhanced my faith life. And just celebrating Mass on TV, just there was that longing that just wasn't met. And not being able to receive Jesus in the Eucharist was something that just gave me great anxiety. Luckily, here at St. Charles Borromeo, we do have a priest that did his very best and worked his magic, I would say, to get us back to church as early as possible. I know there are some that weren't able to be out and about, but from my point of view, I wanted to be back. I wanted to be back with Jesus in the Eucharist and just not have that sense of longing, and that there was just that very important part of my faith life that just wasn't there with me during that time.
So the pandemic was a strange time for us all. And because I'm a priest, I was able to continue celebrating the Eucharist. But how different that was not to have anybody there. And it's one thing for the regular weekday masses, but then when the Sunday masses rolled around, Palm Sunday, the Sacred Triduum, Holy Thursday, Good Friday, the Easter Vigil, Easter Sunday, that to not have anybody in that church other than a camera and maybe someone assisting on the side, there's an emptiness to that. And I particularly was affected by the reality of a lack of communion, that there was a spiritual communion, of course, but like the expression of that, when there's nobody there, when you're looking at an empty pew, or when you're talking to a camera, as I'm talking to a camera right now, this is it's hard to imagine. And you're trying to remember all of those people on the other side and everybody that you're touching and all of the connectedness that we share, and all of that was gone. Boy, that was an emptiness. And that's the word, I guess. There's an emptiness to the celebration of the Eucharist with nobody there. When the church is empty, that emptiness is not just in the physical space, but you experience that in the communion. And so I hope we never, ever have to do anything like that ever again. I don't know if people would stand for it in the future, but it was definitely an empty experience.
I would explain first off, when we enter into Mass, before Mass, there might be a rosary being said, and that's unique to us in that we say that often and sometimes before Mass. I would also let them know that Jesus is in the Eucharist, and so only Catholics are able to receive the Eucharist. I would explain to them there might be points in Mass where we will kneel, and I will be able to help you when to kneel and stand and sit. But there are different points that you'll need to follow along with kneeling and sitting and standing. I could also explain to them that you may see the Stations of the Cross around Mass if you're looking around the church. They're the story of Jesus dying on the cross.
Well, being a convert myself, and someone that didn't experience the Eucharist growing up, I think that would be my main focus. I would just try to help them understand that at the heart of our faith, there is that truth that Jesus is present in the Eucharist. I would just ask them that they really be present during the Mass. There's so many things going on during our Mass that you just need to clear your head, be present, be here with the Lord, with the community, and just take it all in. Listen to the prayers, listen to the music, listen to the priest, and especially just really focus on the consecration of the Eucharist, and just just the words that come back to me all the time and that I would want them to remember when he spoke, this is my body and my blood, given up for you. Do this in remembrance of me. Just try to remember those words. I think those words are so powerful. And Jesus said them. And I believe them, and I would hope that maybe that they could too.
Yeah, this is a good question because I look back at myself when I first started exploring the Catholic faith. I would tell them, don't be intimidated by all the formalities that you see during the Mass, but just come, open your heart, and listen for God. That's why we're truly here. Listen for God and let your heart do the rest. The formalities, you'll learn those over time, like I did. I didn't understand like genuflecting and what that meant and why we do that. And there's a lot of symbolism in the Mass, and there's a lot of ritual. There's a lot of history to it. And I didn't learn all of that until I went through RCA. I've actually been through RCA twice. So yeah, don't be intimidated by the Mass. Just come and listen. That would be my main thing. And then we can have a conversation afterwards.
If someone asked me if they should come to Mass and they weren't Catholic, I would probably say a couple things. Like, yeah, I would happily welcome you there, but there's always this but ... Number one, this is not going to be necessarily easy to understand. That Catholic Mass isn't really our front door. This is the very heart of the home. This is where things get intimate in our relationship with God and one another. And if you're just coming for the first time, it's going to be maybe a little uncomfortable. So I want to acknowledge that, and I just want to tell people that it might not be the most seemingly welcome experience. Not that we don't want to be welcoming, but it's just going to be hard because we all know what we're doing. We all know how this works, but if you've never been here, it's going to be a little more difficult. So that's okay. It's okay to have that experience. And the more and more you attend Mass, the more that just becomes part of who you are, and it flows through you, and those connections are built. I think the second thing I would want to explain to them is that for us as Catholics, we truly believe that the Lord Jesus established this form of worship so that we could encounter the Paschal mystery. So Jesus's death and resurrection are not only memorialized here, but they're encountered here. And so through the words that we hear, and through the gestures, and through the sacrament that we share, we believe and acknowledge that this is the moment that Jesus dies and rises. And by celebrating this Mass, it's how we come in contact with that. And so as you gather with us to pray, that kind of sets the stage. All the ritual and all of the stuff around it, it's the bridge that gets us to the cross, which is why the crucifix is so close to the altar, because we want to remember this is what Christ did for us, and this is how we encounter that. And so I'm happy to welcome you to that. And if you want more, we have this great place called RCIA that we can talk and dive deeper and bring you closer to that mystery.